Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. This is CY. Today we have the honor of interviewing a very famous lady. She is Alicia García Herrero. She is a famous economist working for a leading regional French bank. I will let Alicia to briefly introduce your background. I think I missed something. So please, Alicia.
Thank you very much. It's a very kind introduction. CY, it's always a pleasure to listen to you. I've attended some of your conferences. They're excellent. And just a brief word on myself. I'm a professor actually in Taiwan at Sun Yat-sen Zhongshan Dashi, Sun Yat-sen University in the Finance Academy program. I also teach at Hong Kong University of Science and Technology. And as far as Taiwan is concerned, I'm also at the board of the first international NGO that you have created in this wonderful island called Capri.
Yes, I know Sherry Ling,
Indeed.
A long time, 20 years ago.
Yes, so I am trying to help Capri develop the research program on health, on innovation, on supply chain resilience. And beyond that, I work for a think tank in Europe, in Brussels, called Bruegel, and I do Asia-Europe relations for them. And beyond that, I do work for a bank, as you mentioned, as chief economist for Asia.
Right. But you are based in Taiwan because you are teaching in Taiwan, or because the bank asked you to be based in Taiwan?
No. My bank didn't ask me to be based in Taiwan. It was my personal decision to be based in Taiwan personally, but my official affiliation with the bank is still in Hong Kong. But I spend basically my personal life, my children live here, my husband, so I really like this island. It's a wonderful.
Great. So how long have you been in Taiwan? A couple of years or even longer?
24 years, yeah.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So it's wonderful that we have somebody with a diversified background like yourself to be based in Taiwan and also doing what I'm doing, which is bridging the between Taiwan and other countries in the world. So since you are economists, I want to start by asking you about China. Lately, especially last week, something happened. Of course, this week is a China long holiday, but we see China, maybe because of the policy stimulus, suddenly the stock market, they've been quiet and going down for quite some time, but suddenly going up to the roof. What happened? Is this a short-term phenomenon? What is the stimulus behind it? And do you think that it will be effective and keep lasting?
So first of all, we need to go back to the third plenum. And as everybody knows, especially in Taiwan, you have very good knowledge of China. This is the meeting of the Central Committee of the CCP where reforms are decided. And it happens only every 5 years. So it's a very important event. This time around, there were 300 reforms announced. But when you really look at the details, the reforms were still, in my humble opinion, underwhelming as far as China's macroeconomic imbalances are concerned. To be more specific, the lack of consumption. So, there were things, of course, interesting things being announced. Some were not announced, but they were done. If you recall the increase in the pensionable age in China, which was not announced, and we actually saw it only a few weeks after the third plenum. Well, things are moving, but on the consumption side, still not really there. In fact, the August data for China was really underwhelming. Just to give you a sense, retail sales in China grew much less than ever, 2.1%. Fixed asset investment, 3.4%, really poor data. August was extremely poor. And I think this explains the stimulus. I think the stimulus comes as a realization that China needs to take strong measures to achieve the growth target, 5%. Now, will they manage? Well, I wish them well. I do hope they will manage. It's very good for everybody in the world, including, of course, China. So far, I cannot tell because it's too early, but I can only give you a little bit of a sense of what the stimulus is about. So the announcement started on the 24th of September with the governor of the PBOC, Pan Wen-shen, saying that he would start cutting interest rates, injecting liquidity in the economy, the reserve requirement ratio, and this is very important, create two funds to support the stock market. 800 billion RMB first to prop up the stock market, and then 300 billion to help companies buy back their stocks. So now, if you ask me, am I surprised by the positive response? No, because it's part of the program. The program really is about propping up the market. Of course, that doesn't mean, sometimes you announce these things and it doesn't work anyway. So I think we need to give the PBOC credit because the PBOC has been credible. The market has indeed propped up the stock market. However, on the fiscal front, well, I have to say there's other measures that are very important on the real estate sector. So the PBOC has done something really important, long overdue. It's long overdue, which is allowing refinancing of mortgages from fixed rates to variable rates. That's very important because many Chinese households were stuck with very high cost of mortgages. And now it can come down. So that's very important. The third thing they've done is to announce, although it's not fully confirmed, I have to say, 2 trillion in bond issuance to support the local governments. This is more like fiscal side. The fiscal side, in my humble opinion, is still too moderate to see a major change in economic activity. So my balance, your question is, will it work, is they need to do more fiscal. Okay. And they need to introduce some reforms that push people to consume.
And I also want to ask you, of course, the measures are long overdue, but some people say that it's also, coincide with the United States, to reduce the interest rate. So is this a reflection of what the U.S. government doing, or this is something they have been planning all the way? So what I mean, is this a carefully thought measure, or this is just a reflect countermeasure?
So very good point. What is the relation between the Fed cut, 50 BP so far, quite strong for what the market was expecting, and China's stimulus? I think this is a very good point because I do think they did not dare, or they did not feel comfortable, maybe not there, announcing a big stimulus without the Fed starting to cut rates. Why? This is 2 important reasons. One is the RMB could have weakened rapidly because, the whole idea is if the US cost of funding is still very high, or I just go to US dollar, and therefore I think they needed to wait for the market to fully believe the Fed will continue to cut. So they have more room. In fact, the RMB appreciated very rapidly to 7 from 7.3. So, it worked. This waiting time did work for the impact of the stimulus to be more positive on the exchange rate. The second thing, which is quite important, although less appreciated, is that all of these stimulus measures might hurt the banks. It's very important. Why? Because banks in China already, and Taiwan knows a lot about this, are living under lower and lower interest rates. And, the stimulus will only push this further. So the margin, what we call the net interest margin of the banks, will suffer. On top of that, they need to allow for refinancing of mortgages. So, they were maybe enjoying a juicy 4% on a fixed interest rate mortgage. Now it may go to 2%. All of this is going to reduce the profitability of Chinese banks. So, and this is very smart, I have to say, although it's not yet officially announced. But there's rumors that China will recapitalize the banks. Partially, obviously, but help them recapitalize with public money. This is partially more stimulus to be announced, because 2 trillion is not enough and it's not the purpose. They will need to put money in the banks, because the banks will become less solvent out of this, less profitable, less, as we call, less generation of organic income. As all of this needs to be addressed. So as every time when you do a stimulus, you need to look at who is winning, but also make sure that, you know, nobody's losing too much, because you need to prop up that sector. And in this case, this is the banking sector.
Yeah. And the next question I ask is, China, the economy and the stock market has been bad for quite some time, 2-3 years. And why it took them so long to come up with something? Why not earlier? Right now, people say, oh, so smart. But they should have figured it a long time ago. But is it only because the time, the environment not right, or they missed something? Why it took them so long to do something?
We need to realize that the current Xi Jinping himself, but generally the current leadership, and frankly, rightly so, I have to say this, but Xi Jinping in many occasions expressed negative views about the stimulus in 2008. It was too big, it created a lot of waste. All of this is true. So, you know, I think his first approach to stimulus was negative. And I feel for that idea, because I know China has too much debt. Public debt is 100% of GDP. This is very different from Taiwan. So stimulating will create much more debt. Frankly, this is why most of the announcement now comes from the central bank, if you see what I mean. They are trying to avoid additional public debt. And in other words, and this is again normal, because China is becoming a middle-income country, already is $13,000 per capita. When you become richer, the space is less. Okay, so the space is less. So the decision to stimulate the economy is hard. The other thing is that, and this is again Xi Jinping, but also other, you know, officials, economic officials in China have been very critical of the U.S. stimulus. The U.S. has two, which is true, two expansionary fiscal policy. The Fed did too much. So, you know, doing it themselves is not easy. So, you know, there's been this, I would say, ideological position on the stimulus, which has delayed the decision. I also frankly think that China was expecting better data. I mean, that it's kind of incomprehensible, yeah? You leave zero COVID policies. Of course, you're going to grow fast. So how come? And I think this is so difficult to grasp, that they were waiting and waiting, hoping that the sentiment would change. But it didn't change. So they lost a little bit of time hoping that it would change automatically. These are the two main reasons.
Okay, now let us talk about, you know, the export. The export seems to be relatively strong, you know, compared with consumption, especially now that you have EV, electric vehicles, you know, now it's becoming BYD so powerful and beating Tesla everywhere. And then you see the German and many foreign car manufacturers, even the Japanese got into trouble. And then China have these 新三样, the three new things, you know, the solar panel, the battery, and the EV, all doing well, tremendously well. So there's a renewed. So do you think that the confidence in China about the export, do you think that the export will be sufficiently enough to pump up the economy, compensate for the decline, the loss of investment and consumption?
So I would start by recognizing and applauding China for its massive improvement in innovation. Yeah, this is really something we need to recognize, and really, frankly, for anybody who wants climate change to be addressed, China is doing a lot on that front, no doubt about it. Now, the question is, can China do this in a way that it avoids its own domestic problems? That's the question you're asking me. Chinese exports are growing very fast in volume, really, really very fast. But they're not growing as fast in value, although they improved this year. The latest number, August, is 8.5% in value. Now, behind that is a huge correction in prices. So Chinese automakers, Chinese solar panel producers are reducing their prices to gain market share. Now, is this sustainable? Well, this is feeding, which is a good news for the world, actually, deflationary forces. Because we had very high inflation in the West, this is great news. But of course, by now, say Europe has lower inflation than target already. I mean, it's already very low. China's inflation for export prices is negative, -10 in 2024. It's really -10. It's unheard of. So my point is here, how can you continue lower and lower in prices? Because companies, including very successful companies, let me tell you, CATL, battery maker, they're not making any money anymore because the prices are going down and down and down. So my concern is, and I'm not even talking about protectionism, which is obvious. But I would say even in terms of this type of excessive, I would call it over-competition. China's problem now is over-competition. Why? Because there is incentives for everybody to go into the new production forces. It doesn't matter what you do. You can be a noodle maker, and I'm not exaggerating, because I could tell you there is one noodle maker. So it is, it was in the news just as an example of the distortion, because you give all of these subsidies, and I'm not saying it's all because of subsidies, don't take me wrong. China's innovation ability is amazing, but it creates distortions because some come for the subsidies to compete in the new production forces, and then maybe they become insolvent because they cannot compete, but you've already wasted a lot of resources because they shouldn't be doing that. They should be doing noodles or something else. And therefore, I think we need to realize that for China to maintain this industrial policy, it needs to have fiscal space. So the economy needs to grow, not only the exports, the economy, because that's the base for, that's, as we economists call it, the tax base for the country. The revenue for the local governments to then continue to, and I think this is something that in my opinion, the leadership is starting to see. In fact, this is very interesting, Xi Jinping himself, I think very laudable to hear him saying that there's been a change, that he doesn't want over-competition, that he doesn't want local governments to over-compete. So I think China is getting the message. This can go wrong if you go too far. And also, frankly, on exports, China is pushing to open its market. Why? Because countries are screaming, I mean, they all have current account deficits with China. It's unsustainable. So, I think this is just a note. It is good, but it's not good.
Yeah, I also want to follow in on that. I want to ask you the impact of the U.S. policy, U.S. and Europe, EU, on tariff, the U.S., whether it's Trump or Biden. Trump already say it's going to be at 100% tariff. And the EU this week, going to impose, make a decision probably in the next couple of days, about the new tariff on the EV. So will that be effective? It doesn't look like it will stop Chinese company keep going offshore. They used to be China factory, but it's now the China global factory. They have a factory everywhere, and they penetrate every market. They have the joint venture. So my question is, how will the U.S. and the European, the policy affect China?
Yeah. So first of all, I need to clarify as a European that Biden 100% tariffs, Canada 100% tariffs are not the same as European tariffs. First of all, European are not tariffs. They're called countervailing duties. You may say it's the same, but it's not the same. This is a case at the WTO for subsidies. And in fact, the European Union has estimated the amount of subsidies. If you were sending the information to the European Commission, like BYD, 18%. 18 and 100 is not the same. Not only that, the margin that BYD has in Europe is basically double that of China. So they can afford 18. You know what I mean? Like it's the margin is huge. So don't take me wrong. I don't think BYD will stop exporting to Europe because of 18% tariffs. Turkey has 40%. Brazil, India. So, we are in a world of very high tariffs. So I would not really overstress the European case, as I mentioned, because it was easy to collaborate. Had they proven there were no subsidies, the tariffs would have been zero. So it's not the same, in my opinion, situation. And on top of that, you're right. These subsidies will generate push for China to produce domestically in Turkey, in Brazil, in Europe. Maybe not in the US, because US is different, 100% tariffs. Probably not even FDI will be allowed. It's a different situation. So yes, Chinese companies will become real multinationals like Japanese companies did in the past. But then the question really is, this money will maybe come back to the mainland. Maybe not, because there's capital controls. We know for a fact, based on past experience, companies operating overseas, Fosun, you name it, maybe the money, the transfer back and the creation of wealth in the mainland is not guaranteed. Now, what will the mainland do? Chinese workers. That's the key question I have. Yeah, because when Japan did this, it's called the flying geese in the 80s. Japan was much richer than the mainland today per capita. So it's not the same. It's not the same situation. This is why, even if I do think there will be companies leaving, it might not be comparable to Japan, because China will still need to produce in the mainland. The other issue, very important, is called, Taiwan knows a lot about this because of your offshore wind industry, and unfortunately, WTO case from Europe on Taiwan. But it's about the local content. Europe could start imposing local content.
Taiwan gave out the local content, offshore wind, total failure.
Exactly. So if these countries, Brazil, Turkey, want a lot of local content, what will China do? Because the content, China now is thinking, bring in the batteries, bring in everything, assembling. Because they still want the production capacity in China, if you see what I mean. So how is this going to be solved? This is a big question. So I don't have an answer yet, but I just want to explain that it's not so easy as it looks.
Yeah, I want to talk about the China domestic market. Earlier you mentioned the market. Now, China seems to be open up the market, welcoming foreign companies to come in. And despite the local competition, foreign companies do come in. And Apple, although now dropped to number 6, they still want the China market. Tesla, I bet you Elon Musk didn't dare say he doesn't care about China market. And then you have everyone else, Starbucks, Boeing, everyone. So do you foresee that China opening up the market more to sort of stimulating foreign companies to come in order to stimulate maybe more domestic consumption? Do you see that trend?
I lost your last words.
Oh, do you see that trend, of keep opening up and the foreign companies coming to China?
Yes. Well, Li Chang has been really working on this for a long time. I do think China realizes that they need to open more sectors because they need more FDI. But I'm not sure about the conditions, because the problem now is that if you invest in China for China, say you are a retail company, you are, say, my country, Inditex, Zara, but you don't sell anymore in China. You sell very much less. So, first there's more competition. There's Shein, but Shein doesn't operate in China, but there's other brands. But also, most importantly, people are not consuming. So, you have to face it. Turkey's consumption is growing 3 times that of China. So, the companies also look at their opportunities, yeah? And some sectors are still not open, yeah? Telecom, tourism, many sectors are not yet open.
Yeah, and do you think that the recent boosting of the stock market will improve, the consumers' confidence? Maybe a little bit.
China needs to do that because it's very important to receive FDI. Not for the money, it's for to be in the market, to be part of the global market. But there is always a tendency to say we only open when we are ready.
Yeah. We have a limited time. I have two last questions for you. One is about geopolitics. I do a lot about covering geopolitics seminar. And then the election is coming in a month, U.S. election. And then we know that despite the outcome, we know the whole world is going to be more geopolitical. And the war is everywhere. In the Middle East, terrible. In Ukraine, Russia, getting very ugly. This is not a China question, but more a global question. Do you think that somehow, but related with China, that the whole world is in disorder, but China seems to be relatively stable, and U.S. Big trouble ahead. Although the economy is still strong. What is your prediction? The geopolitics affecting economy ultimately.
I mean, I agree with you that the U.S. is at a crossroads politically, socially. I hear you, and I lived in the U.S. and I just didn't want to live there, to be very frank. And this was many years ago. I left in literally 97. I did my PhD in the U.S. I worked for the IMF. So I hear you, but I have to recognize something. We need to recognize the following. I bought a little apartment, I sold it. I would be rich if I hadn't sold it. Let me give you another example. Had I invested in US stocks, I would be rich by now. I would not be rich, which I did, if I had invested in Chinese stocks or the real estate market or an apartment bought in the 2010s. That's the reality. We need to recognize that. And it's like mind-boggling if you think about it. China's GDP has been multiplied by 8 since it entered the WTO, 8 times. If you had bought the stock, you would be at the same level. Isn't it mind-boggling? It is. Now, why is this the case? Is it because the US markets are, dominated by US players and one day? Maybe, but it's also true that the US is a very dynamic economy. It's very dynamic. If you look at major innovations, I'm not saying China does not innovate, but when you look at path-breaking innovations, they start in the US, still today. This is the reality. And I don't think it can be denied. This creates huge income inequality. The social model is broken, you name it. But as whoever is an investor listens to this and says, yeah, this is... So it is very hard to break this circle, And frankly speaking, and I give you the last number, if you look at research and development, China has by now bypassed the European Union, 2.3% of GDP. Fine. South Korea is 4.4, but South Korea is smaller. So it's 4.4 of a smaller GDP. The US, since 2021, accelerated, it's all private, by the way, R&D to the point of being close to South Korea already. Who is going to stop that? So, I'm just saying, I hear you, and frankly, as a European, I cannot understand it because I feel the model is broken when you look at the details and the social thing. But when you look at the actual results, it's mind-boggling. Right. So that's something that, to me, we need to realize. No matter who wins these elections, let me tell you this loud and clear. I doubt the US dynamism in terms of technological breakthroughs will stop. If you just look, new universities being created in the US, in Arizona, many of which with contracts with the Arizona State University, it's mind-boggling. They're producing 32,000 engineers a year, which was unheard of for that university. And this has happened in the course of 4 years. Who can do that in 4 years? So, there is some strengths which are a little bit hard to explain, but that we need to realize. So what's my prospect? I think China needs to do its utmost to avoid this fate of Japan. Its utmost. At the moment, China is experiencing deflation. China's convergence with the US stopped in 2022, but very, very strongly. If China cannot grow nominally, including prices, the convergence with the US will no longer continue. So China will be smaller and smaller. Now, is this important? Well, for me, no, because China is already a huge country and a huge economy. I don't mind, but the leadership might mind. So this is the question. Then China needs to open up. But it's very, very obvious to me, because that's the way to stay in the innovation cloud beyond your own indigenous innovation, which is great. But the US is outpacing all of that. So, for me, China needs to open 100%.
So as a conclusion, would you agree that, I know you're from Europe, but Europe seems to be a beginning of a long decline, and China is a gradual rise, and the US is a crossroads. So ultimately, the world will be very interesting if, in the next couple of years.
The world, to finish this, will be in an asymmetric multipolarity. This is, for me, very clear. Europe will be smaller, but it will not be insignificant, because it's still a large market today. The size of the market today is the same, virtually the same as the US and China today, but it will go down and down and down. China will go up, but much less than before. So its actually relative share might no longer increase, because India will grow faster, and Brazil and Turkey and
Asian countries, Southeast Asia will rise, and Japan is now coming back.
Exactly. So US and China will probably see a little bit of a shrink in their relative share, and more will come. Now, still US and China will be the largest. So that's why I say asymmetric multipolarity. Two big fellows, but many others, which can create also alternatives, because they can create partnerships. India, ASEAN, we never talk about this, but it's very important. Europe can play a role depending on whether it continues with the transatlantic alliance or not. We don't know that, depending on Trump. So, I would say we need to, our brain has to be more flexible in terms of asymmetric multipolarity.
Excellent. So that was that, the asymmetric plurality, is the 非等比的这个多极世界, it's enlightening. So really, I appreciate very much today, that I have the honor and the pleasure of interviewing Alicia García Herrero, the famous economist now based in Taiwan. She shared with us a lot of enlightening global views. This is like you say, it's mind-boggling. I think we are entering into a very interesting period. I do hope that Taiwan will stand strong, amongst all the complexity.
And you have a huge advantage. China and the US, for that matter, better than anybody. So
I only hope that our leader will have the wisdom, to play this skillfully. So again, thank you so much, Alicia. We really appreciate and enjoy conversation with you. I hope in the future I can have a more opportunity to face-to-face to discuss with you.
Indeed, I will certainly do that. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, and thank you for watching Smart Gate. This concludes the program for today. Bye-bye now.
Bye-bye.